Visitor, so they didn't let me up. Security came. I don't know if that was a problem.
By the way, I was looking at your Twitter feed. Was yesterday your birthday?
Oh, it was. Isn't it great to be 36? I love it.
Happy birthday.
What'd you do?
My kids got a cake for me and went out with some friends. We had a blast. It was really fun.
Right. And you got to wonder if Laura Ingraham will be celebrating next year in the White House. You don't even know. It might be some role there. Will they throw you some type of party?
Lots of people were emailing me yesterday, and I was kind of in a news blackout for part of the day, and they were emailing me about questions about, and it's something I don't really have a lot of information on. I think the stories about Sean Spicer's removal from the White House were wrong-headed from the beginning. Same stories about Steve Bannon and Kellyanne, and the president, at least for the time being, his team is his team, and he's the guy who makes the call, nobody else.
Well, those unnamed sources that newspaper people and people online talk to. Would you be interested in being the president's press secretary, standing at that podium every day?
Yeah, I've always said that if it's something that I think I could do well and it would really advance the agenda of this administration at a time where I think there's so much at stake for the country and for the future, I would think about it. I'm not sure if that's the role I would pick for myself, but I have a legal background, strategic, political communications
and
planning. I'm not sure the press secretary thing is something I'm dying to do.
I think you'll be successful as long as you call on Jim Acosta. Evidently, he gets angry when you don't.
Oh, does he? Well,
you'd have to be tough as nails. It wouldn't intimidate you to do it.
You're joking, right?
She's joking.
Crowd every day. No, it would be fun to do it every now and then. So who knows? Who knows?
I'd love to see you in that role, though. You'd fire back. It'd be great.
I think these guys have been around Washington, most of them for a long time. These reporters, and it's a relationship that has to be cultivated over time. And everyone can complain about the unfair media, but I know there are some good reporters out there, and I think that what we've seen over the last few months is there's about 90% focus on Russia, Mueller, Comey, and 10% on policy and the agenda and economic renewal and the threats that we face and how we're addressing them. I would flip that narrative. I think 90% of the focus should be on the agenda.
Absolutely.
But you can't control the questions. The questions.
Yeah, I would really focus on the issues that got President Trump elected. Let the lawyers do their job in dealing with Mueller and his merry band of prosecutors. But I think there's a lot of good stuff happening. There's a lot of great stuff that came out of that foreign trip. The president needs to remember the reason he got elected to shake up Washington. Washington doesn't want to be shaken. They want to keep in the same, the same tone and the same benefits and the same approach that they've, been having for decades now. They don't want that to change. He's a disruptor, and the swamp will try to eat him alive.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's shaking up Washington. I don't know if you've heard, but he absolutely is. But let's talk about something extremely serious that matters a lot to him and every American. It turns out that brutal regime of North Korea has essentially killed Otto Warmbier, the student who was traveling through there, and they claim took a poster off the wall. He got 15 years hard labor. What he really got was a delayed death sentence. What's our appropriate response?
Well, I mean, this is not new. This is what they do. They keep people in 5 by 6 foot cells, withhold food, withhold any type of nourishment, liquids, water, multiple beatings, electrocutions. I mean, this is the regime of North Korea. We still have 3 Americans there being held there. He was murdered, and he was murdered by the regime. I mean, they delivered him back to die. That's what they did. China also has thousands and thousands of people in re-education camps. We have a horrific persecution of Christians and dissidents in China. Now, we got a lot of business interests in China, so people kind of take a blind eye to that. And it's just, Russia is the evil one, and China is the great dynamic state-run economy. Now, there's a lot of evil in the world. The question is, what is America's role in advancing our interests, our allies' interests, and also remaining that beacon of freedom? for the rest of the world. Donald Trump ran on a non-interventionist foreign policy, and sometimes we do have to intervene, but you have to be very careful how you do it. We have a very dangerous situation now in Syria, and that could, I mean, we could start World War if we don't watch how we handle that situation with the Russian planes.
We do have a big responsibility. When you started the interview and you talked about your birthday, I couldn't help but think you're celebrating with your family because we live in this great country and we can do that. Meanwhile, we have this young man who is dying, taking his last breath yesterday because of what happened in another country, a communist country. And what is our role in this? We have our president now, our current president, President Trump, intervened, and he brings him home. The family, we interviewed them here on Fox and Friends, and they said that President Obama told the family, you need to keep a low profile. Do you think things would be different if President Obama had intervened earlier and had not told the family that? Would we be even discussing this morning?
I don't know. I'm not going to pronounce that it would have been different if Obama had handled it differently. That's just sheer speculation. I have no idea. I think it's very difficult to game out what North Korea is going to do on any given day. We know that they are desperate for food supplies, any traded material, which is where they get the help that they get from China and so forth. But, you know, this is the problem that MacArthur called, you know, the intractable problem. If we didn't solve Korea and the Korean War, that 50 years later would still be dealing with the Korean Peninsula. He was right. And this is what we're facing today. This is an existential threat to the United States. I think it's the #1 threat that we face today. And the president has essentially stated that. ISIS is a huge threat, but so is North Korea. And our government should be really unified in how we respond and, you know, drop the partisanship when it comes to an issue like this, because this is beyond serious.
So far they have.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of partisanship and unification, there's no, that building behind you, they're not unified when it comes to health care. And I know the Republicans are talking about in the Senate, Mitch McConnell is going to do his best to try to get something done by the 4th of July. Some are suggesting, you know what, maybe they should cancel the August recess. It's interesting. We've got a soundbite we were going to play for you. Here's Elizabeth Warren. She appeared last night with Bernie Sanders on a Facebook Live thing. She talks about why the Republicans can't pass health care. And, of course, it has to do with lining the pockets of those darn Koch brothers. Listen.
I think it's beyond cowardly. I think it's actually very strategic on their part. I think they've decided that, look, they know which side their bread is buttered on. They know what the Koch brothers want them to do, and a handful of other giant corporations and billionaires, to turn our political system into something where they can say up is down, in is out, over is under, and be able to sell it and not have to pay any price at all for the harm that they have inflicted on millions of people across this country.
Which then takes us to another.
I guess she's forgotten that health care is failing Obamacare across this country.
Well, yeah, listen, you have to hand it to the Democrats. They have just one speed, and it's attack, 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 attack. Meanwhile, Republicans are attacking each other. So, look, she and Bernie Sanders, right after we had this horrific shooting last week of Steve Scalise and others, were talking about how everyone needs to fight, fight, fight. It was all about fighting in that Facebook Live appearance. And imagine if the Republicans had used such aggressive terminology in the direct aftermath of a similar shooting. Maybe a lot of criticism after the Gabby Gifford shooting of Republican lingo and branding, and Sarah Palin was the villain. But they really have one speed, and it's move forward and lacerate your opponents. You know, if you're a Democrat and you're a liberal, those two are your heroes. And they're resisting everything. I mean, they're resisting everything the president does. So the question is, what is Congress going to do? The Republicans have got to pass legislation that's going to make the lives of everyday Americans better. If they do not, they should leave office. They should not be in Washington because apparently, you know, they're either too afraid or they want to resist Trump themselves, or I don't know what it is. But they should not go home to fundraisers and picnics in August if they can't get their rear ends in gear and deliver for the American people. And I hope President Trump, and I assume President Trump, is delivering that message to them. How many votes do you need, Mitch? How many votes do you have? What can you pass with those votes? Let's pass it.
Right.
That's what should happen.
And McConnell's still holding, to read the Wall Street Journal today, that he can get it done by July 4th. He might extend it a couple of days if he's just a few votes short.
Hope so.
All right. Happy birthday, Laura.
Happy day.
Good to see you guys.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Meanwhile, 11 minutes after the hour, Jillian, you have the news.
Yes, I do. Good morning to you guys. To you at home as well. Let's begin with a Fox News alert right now. The man killed after ramming his car into a police convoy in Paris had a stockpile of deadly weapons. We're talking about guns, ammunition, and gas canisters, all on hand for the botched attack, with even more at home. He even had a gun permit despite being on a terror watch list. And while you were sleeping, police reportedly arresting 4 of the suspect's family members, including his father. The U.S. Coast Guard is questioning the crew on board the cargo ship that slammed into a U.S. Navy destroyer. They will also interview the USS Fitzgerald crew and gather electronic data and ship tracking information from both vessels. Japan's Coast Guard is investigating why it took nearly an hour to report the collision that left 7 American sailors dead. And a Senate showdown overnight. Democrats seizing control of the floor, demanding Republicans hold a hearing on the health care bill.
Republicans won't relent and debate their health care bill in the open for the American people to see. They shouldn't expect business as usual.
The talkathon ending just after midnight. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, taking it one step further, saying, quote, Trump care's assault on seniors and working families is indefensible and Republicans on both sides of the Capitol know it. That's a look at your headlines, guys. I'll see you in a little bit.
Yep, that unity didn't last very long.
Nope.
All right, Jillian,
Thanks,
thank you.
Jillian.
Coming up on this Tuesday, the president meeting with tech leaders at the White House where he may have found some help for the DNC. We're going to explain live from Washington next.
Yesterday, President Trump vowing to put our cybersecurity first.
As you can see right there, our commander-in-chief teaming up with top tech bosses to make the sweeping digital changes to our government.
Kristen Fisher is live at the White House with the details for us. Hey, Kristen.
Hey guys, good morning. Well, this was a major meeting of some of the most powerful CEOs, not just in the U.S., but the world. And they were summoned here to the White House to brainstorm about how to modernize the nation's technology infrastructure. The heads of Apple, Google, IBM, and Microsoft were all there, and they went around the table offering their ideas of how to unleash the creativity of the private sector on the federal government and what they should focus on. Here's Amazon's Jeff Bezos.
Just a couple of things that you could certainly focus on. One would be using commercial technologies wherever possible. The second one is to continue to work hard on figuring out ways to retrain and upskill workers all over the U.S. And then the third thing to keep your eye on, and I think it would be impossible to overstate this, is that the United States needs to, in every way, at every level, be working on machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Now, one of the big issues at this inaugural meeting of the American Technology Council was cybersecurity, and it made for one of the more entertaining exchanges of the day. Listen.
I'm Tom Layton from Akamai, and we protect government websites from attackers, the majority of the government websites, including whitehouse.gov.
The DNC could have used you.
Well,
So President Trump joking that the DNC could have used that cybersecurity firm's help before it was hacked last summer. But, in all seriousness, this really is a very serious issue. Many of our nation's infrastructure systems, technology systems are more than, 50 years old. And one of the examples that was used yesterday, the Department of Defense still uses 8-inch floppy disks on some systems. Can you believe that? 8-inch floppy disks. I can't remember the last time I saw one.
Kristen, everything the president's done so far, this might have been among the most important things to date, to get everybody together to modernize government.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a critical focus of this White House, led by the president's senior advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner. He's been the driving force behind it. And, a lot of folks were pretty excited that they got to hear him speak officially for the first time as an administration official yesterday.
That's right. Kristen Fisher, thank you very much. Talking about how we're going to modernize the government, but also streamline. It's so complicated to do all this.
And that was the headline on mainstream media. What does Jared Kushner's voice sound like?
Now we know. All right, Kristen,
thanks,
thank you. Meanwhile, we've got a Fox News alert. The polls are open in Georgia at this hour for the most expensive House race in history. The results could have implications much bigger than that state. Republican candidate Karen Handel, pictured right there, is going to join us next on the other side of a brief timeout.
I saw Ian. That's what Ian looks like.
We have got a Fox News alert. All eyes are on the state of Georgia as the most expensive House of Representatives race in history comes to a head today. Republican Karen Handel facing Democrat and newcomer to politics Jon Ossoff to fill Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price's vacant House seat.
And with more than 140,000 early votes cast, the stakes have never been higher right now for Republicans and Democrats. And joining us right now on our very busy day is GOP congressional nominee Karen Handel. Karen, you've never led technically in this race. What makes you believe you're going to come out on top today?
We held our own in early voting, neck and neck, and Republicans in Georgia in the 6th district, they are Election Day voters, and they're coming out in force.
Karen, you're getting support from the White House. The president's tweeted about it. I know that he campaigned in your area. Then Tom Price also was with you the last few days. 97% of the money that the Democrat has gotten, Jon Ossoff, has come from out-of-state funds. You've got liberal Hollywood supporting this guy who doesn't even live in your district, in the district that he wants to change and to represent. So, what is your reaction? What's the reaction of your constituents there in Georgia? Are they okay with liberal Hollywood dictating what happens in Georgia?
The people of the 6th District want this to be about the 6th District. They are not interested in Hollywood and California coming in and buying this seat, and they are very concerned about an individual who does not even live in this district. For me, the voters in the 6th, they know me and they trust me, and that's why I feel really good about today.
Sure. Karen, what do you make of, I've been watching some of the other channels, and they say if she, the Republican, loses, it's really a referendum on Donald Trump. She would have lost because people in that district, which is heavily Republican, don't like the president.
You know, it's really been, I think, about the money. And again, I feel very, very optimistic about today. So I'm not going to engage in a conversation about the other side of it. I feel good about where things are. The people of the 6th, Republicans are motivated. They do not want someone who lives outside of the district coming in and representing them. And they surely don't want Nancy Pelosi's guy coming in to try to buy this seat.
Well, a lot of his policies seem to be moderate, if not conservative. How do you square that with a Democrat who's supported by so many liberals like Michael Moore on down? Do you not think that his views are authentic? Is he not portraying himself accurately?
Absolutely not. This is a young man who was a junior staffer for one of the most liberal members of Congress, Hank Johnson. He is a liberal in just the same along the lines as Nancy Pelosi. He's going to be her vote in the House. What the people of the 6th want is a vote for them.
So, Karen, what do the voters there in Georgia want? What separates you from your opponent, Jon?
The things that he talks about, I've actually done, from balancing budgets, cutting spending, being on right out there to deal with corruption. They know that I'm a person who is determined to get the job done. They want experience, and most importantly, they want someone from this community who's actually lived in this community and has relationships representing them.
And you've lived there for over 25 years. Mr. Ossoff may move to the district if he wins. I know you got some help from the President of the United States. He sent out a couple of tweets. He tweeted, Karen Handel for Congress. She will fight for lower taxes, great health care, strong security, a hard worker who will never give up. Vote today. Okay, that's for the people who have not voted yet, but as we have learned from our diner segment today, a lot of people, Karen, have already voted.
Mm-hmm. They have about 140,000 people early voted, so I think that's probably going to be about half of the total turnout for today. It's going to probably be not only historic on the money, but historic on the turnout. And when Election Day turnout is high, that means Republican turnout is high. And we know Republicans stayed home in the primary. They are coming out to vote in this runoff.
Wow, it's very interesting because the Real Clear has Real Clear average has 1.5 percentage points between the two of you. So it's really got to be an Election Day call, and more pollsters are on the line. But in the big picture, Karen, Tom Price wins his seat by 23 points. Donald Trump wins the district by 1.5%. Why are you struggling so much to get some distance or even catch Jon Ossoff?
Well, remember, a special election is completely different because it's wide open with no incumbent, and so it's essentially jump ball, if you will. But again, I feel very, very confident about things today, and I know Republicans are coming out to vote.
All right. Well, we wish you all the best. Thank you so much for coming on with us. We have a lot of viewers in the state of Georgia, and we appreciate you accepting our invitation. We did ask your opponent to come on, and he declined. Thank you. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, and you'll see the results tonight right here on Fox News. Special coverage this evening. Meanwhile, Democrats staging an all-nighter on the Senate floor last night. Sorta. It was a talk-a-thon. They talked for 6 straight hours, hoping to stop the Republican health care bill. Ted Cruz, the man who stood on that same floor for 21 hours to block Obamacare, has a message for the Democrats, and he's coming up next.
Plus, a stunning development in the case of the Obama administration spying on Team Trump. Texas Senator Ted Cruz joins us right now. It's always great to see you. 27 minutes before the top of the hour. And Senator, I'd like to pick up where you just left off on this Georgia 6 special election. What do you think's at stake? Because you're such a you always read trends in the media, where we're heading, where we're not. What do you read from this? What do you expect will happen?
Well, it's certainly an important race. We've seen Democrats and liberals all across the country pouring tens of millions of dollars into the race. What they hope to get is a victory against President Trump. They're using this as a proxy to try to attack the president, try to attack the new administration and the Republican majorities in both houses. And a special election is always unpredictable. It's hard to know exactly what's going to happen, but it's going to be a turnout game. And so I would certainly say to voters in Georgia, if you are in the district, please come out and vote for Karen Handel. It matters to show up, and right now the left, they're agitated, they're furious, they're angry, and so they're motivated to show up, and it's just a question of whether Republicans and conservatives will show up in the special election.
Well, Senator, I've heard Democrats say on television that it is the most important election in the history of the world, unless Mr. Ossoff loses, and then not so much.
They're saying it's the Scott Brown election for them.
Well, you know, they said that as well in Kansas for Mike Pompeo's seat, and Republicans won that. They said that in the Montana seat, Republicans won that. Look, eventually Democrats may win one of these. I mean, elections, particularly special elections, are unpredictable, but it is important to show up and turn out. They're trying to use this as a dagger to stop the conservative agenda, to stop Obamacare repeal, to stop tax reform, to stop the reasons why the American people gave us a Republican president and Republican majorities in both houses. And so if you care about that agenda, if you care about strong conservatives on the Supreme Court, it matters to win these elections.
I know that meant a lot to you. He did appoint the Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. You had a contentious relationship with President Trump when you guys were running against each other, but he did appoint Neil Gorsuch. He wants the tax cuts, energy independence, Obamacare repeal and replace. These are things that you were on board with as well. Are you happy with his agenda so far, thus far, now that he's 151 days in?
I think on policy and substance, the new president and new administration have done very well. I think if you look at the cabinet that's been appointed, this is probably the most conservative cabinet we've seen in decades. If you look at the executive actions, they've been quite strong, whether freezing the hiring of new civilian non-military employees, whether putting in place a moratorium on regulations, whether stopping taxpayer funding for overseas abortion, or whether pulling out of the disastrous job-killing Paris Climate Agreement. All of those were strong decisions with a mandate from the people. And the single biggest and most important thing the president has done is appointing Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. And the best thing Senate Republicans have done is confirming Justice Gorsuch.
You know, over the weekend, I was struck by a New York Times columnist who's a conservative, but he's such a Trump critic. You wonder sometimes if he actually is. David Brooks says the more you look at it, there's nothing there in terms of collusion with Russia. And this is looking like we're getting way off track here. You have a great legal mind, Senator. Where is this thing heading, especially with Robert Mueller, who was endorsed by both sides, hiring the type of team he's put together?
Listen, this is all a political circus at this point. Democrats and sadly much of the liberal media are using this as an excuse just to attack the president. They want this president to fail. They want the administration to fail. And I think that's really unfortunate. You know, I got to tell you, there's an amazing divide When you're in Washington, D.C., the only question any reporter ever wants to ask you about is about Russia, is about impeachment, is about attacking the president. When I go home to Texas, I travel the state. I answer questions from people across the state. Nobody asks about that. They ask about Obamacare. Are you going to repeal this disastrous law so my premiums go down so I can afford health care? They ask about tax reform. I'd like taxes to be simpler. Ideally, what I'd like to see is a simple flat tax, and we abolish the IRS. People outside of Washington are interested in real policies that are going to produce jobs, raise wages. They're not interested in the nonsense, in the attack game and the personal destruction that consumes Washington.
So, Senator, are y'all going to work through the recess to work on health care, to work on the tax reform?
You know, I certainly hope so. In my view, there are 4 big priorities for 2017. Repealing Obamacare, fundamental tax reform, major reg reform, and the Supreme Court. And when it comes to repealing Obamacare,